Welcome into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com for this and other great podcasts and articles. Sap, I got to give you a lot of credit. You nailed your predictions last night. Both the teams that you thought were going to win did. Your zigzag theory alive and well.
Yeah, 2-0 to start the postseason. You don't touch the first games of any series. You have to let that take place, and then you go from there. Kind of the way LeBron James handles the playoffs, where he looks at the first game as a feeling out process. Yeah, I thought that the Milwaukee Bucks would take care of business because everybody in the world was saying, boy, if Miami plays a little bit better, they'll win game two. And sometimes you got to think a little differently than the masses. So Milwaukee went out. I didn't expect them to shoot threes like they did, but they did, and they won handily. And I think most people thought that Denver would even that series, that Nikola Jokic would have more than one assist, and he came up big, as did Dame Lillard of the Portland Trailblazers. But Dame didn't have all that much help, whereas where Nikola Jokic did have help for Denver. So that series 1-1. So we'll give out our picks for tonight according to the zigzag theory. It's out of my hands. I just go by what the zigzag theory says. So it's pretty simple. Just follow it.
Yeah, you're like a religious zealot, but to the zigzag theory.
Yeah, or like a baseball manager,
It's all up
it's
to
there.
the greater power. I surrender to the zigzag theory.
It's out of my control. Yeah, just as long as I remember who covered the last game, which you can always look up, obviously, and then you just go with the team that didn't cover to cover the next game.
There you go. So yeah, the Bucks absolutely crushed the Heat, 132-98 to put Milwaukee up 2-0 in this series. That's got to feel great for the Bucks, who lost to Miami last year in the bubble and basically escaped by the skin of their teeth in overtime in game one to really just take it to the Heat. I'm sure that they're breathing a big sigh of relief today and saying, okay, not only can we beat this team, but we're better than this team.
Yeah, they're in a good position now. They just have to win 2 of the next 5. Now, obviously, it would help Milwaukee to get through this series as quickly as possible, because your next opponent's going to be the Brooklyn Nets, who will probably make quick work of the Boston Celtics. So both of those series could be over in 4, maybe 5 games. Gives them a little chance to kind of, heal some bumps and bruises and prepare for what will be, I think, an epic matchup between the Bucks and the Nets. And you saw it last night. And we talked about before the series, Jet, that Milwaukee's offense does run better when it's not just centered on Giannis. When he brings the ball up the court and he's at the top of the key, teams are just daring him to try to break through that wall, and it sometimes doesn't work. Last night you saw multiple ball handlers. You also saw how well they moved the ball, and next thing you know, you got wide open threes from a multitude of guys. Pat Connaughton goes 5 for 9 from 3. Bryn Forbes looked like Steph Curry out there, and it just all kind of fit in. And then Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton and Giannis were outstanding as always, especially on the defensive end of the court. I think they're going to be tough to beat. I really do. And I'm looking forward to what will be a Brooklyn-Milwaukee series. Now, I don't think the Milwaukee series is quite over yet, because we know Miami is a tough-minded team. But if they can go into Miami and win one of those two, wrap it up in game 5, that's a pretty good situation for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, for a team that really prides themselves on defense and has a lot of good defensive players in Miami, letting the other team score 132 points has got to be disappointing, because, like you said, Giannis had a great game, but you always expect him to put up good numbers. He had 31, 13, and 6, and then 3 steals and a block. He was all over the place. But then, like you mentioned, Sap, Forbes had 22 points, Connaughton 15, Bobby Portis 11 points. So you got some major contributions out of the bench, and that meant that Drew Holiday was okay just scoring 11 points, but he had 15 assists in that game and could play good defense.
Yeah, to my point that they were running the offense through him more so than Giannis. I like to see Giannis on a wing or in the low post. Again, you can run pick and roll with him, and you can lob to him. And, look, I could probably lob to Giannis, and it would result in 2 points. His catch radius is ridiculous. So I like when they do that. We know what they're going to give you on the defensive end. If they're efficient on the offensive end, look out. I believe they had 46 field goals made last night, and they had 34 assists to go with that. That's an outstanding ratio. When you're getting an assist on 3/4 of your made baskets, that's something that is tough to beat because it tires the defense and you end up with a lot of open shots. We've watched the Celtics all year. When they've played some decent basketball, it's when they move the ball and get over 25 assists. Well, Milwaukee just took it to another level last night. And look, that seemed to be a blowout from the second quarter on. It seemed to be garbage time for the final 2.5 quarters because Miami's not a team that's going to come from behind. They're more of a defensive team, sometimes a plotting team, and then they'll try to set up their threes. So once Milwaukee built up that 20-plus point lead, you just kind of have a feeling the game was over.
Yeah, I mean, they got 60-plus points from their bench, which, I mean, it's hard to lose when your bench plays that well.
Yeah.
And, they scored – I'm looking at the Bucks for a sec. They scored 46 points in the first quarter. I mean, they just came out like a house of fire. And for a team to do that to Miami, like I said, they have a defensive identity, and they have – Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, two guys who people consider to be some of the best defensive players in the league. Trevor Ariza is no slouch defensively. We've talked about Andre Iguodala. They have guys who play D, and Milwaukee just lit them up early.
Yeah, you can't do much when an offense like Milwaukee's is moving the ball so perfectly, and then the three-point shooters are connecting, whether it be Connaughton or Forbes, Middleton. As you said, Drew Holiday didn't have to force it in terms of scoring points, but 15 assists, that's a really good night for him. And then Giannis just does everything else. We know Giannis is an elite defender. He's going to control the boards, and it kind of opens up some things for him cutting to the basket or posting up, because now those three-point shooters have opened up the floor for Giannis to have a little bit more breathing room. We were both high on Milwaukee going into this postseason. We both had them beating Miami in this series. I think they're going to beat Brooklyn in the next round. You don't, but we got to get there
Fingers
first.
crossed.
But I'm high on them. Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this today. I'm like, what happens if the Lakers get bounced early, which I don't think is going to happen. But anything can happen, as everything's possible, or whatever Kevin Garnett said. Anything's possible, right? Is that what Garnett shouted out after the title?
What he said,
go.
Sap.
Yeah,
exactly
I don't
what he
always
said.
give him all that much credit. That was the year he didn't have 3 rebounds in the closeout game. That was 2010 instead. But I'm like, who would I root for after the Lakers get bounced? It might be the Milwaukee Bucks, because you know what? When I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was a huge Bucks fan. Marcus Johnson, Sidney Moncrief, Bob Lanier, Don Nelson coaching them. That was a team that was my favorite team. It's a good sports city. And, I think everybody loves and respects Giannis, and it would be kind of a cool story. This guy comes from overseas,
sure,
is the, middle of the first round, wins back-to-back MVPs, and they kind of built a nice team around him, making a big trade for Drew Holiday, and surrounding him with some nice pieces. I think if the Lakers are out of the equation, and again, I don't think that's going to happen. I still think the Lakers can win this whole thing. It's not going to be easy, but the second team I'd be rooting for would be the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, Philadelphia, okay, that's also a decent story with Embiid and Ben Simmons and Doc Rivers and all that. But, growing up in Boston, there was a natural rival with the 76ers. Even though in the 80s, the Celtics and Bucks had some pretty good playoff series, they each beat each other once in the postseason. There was never a huge rivalry there, because the Celtics rivalry in the 80s was first with Philly, and then if you got past Philly, you had to deal with the Lakers. Milwaukee would probably be the team I'd be rooting for at that point. It's not going to be the Clippers. And also being a LeBron James fan, I don't want to see Kevin Durant get a third title. I don't want to see Kyrie Irving get a second title with 2 different teams. And I certainly don't want Kawhi winning a third title, because then the conversation gets, Kawhi and Durant are only one behind LeBron. I don't want that conversation. I'm too tired for that.
I do. But the Bucks are likable, Sap. They are. Yeah. There's nothing to dislike about this team. I want to focus for a second, though, on what's going wrong with the Heat now that they're in this 0-2 hole. And Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo have not played well in their first 2 games. In fact, Jimmy Butler only had 10 points last night. Didn't attempt a 3-pointer. Another guy who's standing out to really, in these first 2 games, very, very poor play, Tyler Hero, 18 minutes last night, just 1 of 5 from the floor, 4 points. They're not getting anything out of him. Jimmy Butler's not scoring enough. Bam Adebayo is not rebounding enough. What's going on? What can we infer about these 3 guys on the Heat?
They've been piss poor. I mean, Jimmy Butler is a unique player, right? I mean, he's a guy who does a lot of things really well. I mean, he's a solid rebounder. think he averaged over 7 assists per game this year. He's a very good passer. He's not a real good three-point shooter, and he kind of knows that, so he's not going to hoist up a lot of three-pointers in a given game. He's good going to the basket, but his offense can come and go. That's the least impressive part of his game. His defense is excellent, ability to rebound, ability to pass, and ability to lead. So when he's having an off night from the floor, it really puts a lot of pressure on everyone else in that lineup. And Bam Adebayo, who's an outstanding player, but he's not a natural scorer either. He's going to get you 16, 17 points a game, some putbacks, some alley-oops at the rim, those types of things. He's not a guy you're going to run your offense through, although he's a very good passer. It comes down to their three-point shooters, and other than Duncan Robinson, those guys have not played well at all. Last night was kind of just a weird game because they just got down so early, and they never recovered from that. The first game was there for them to win. If Bam and Jimmy Butler shot better than 8 for 37 from the floor, maybe they would have won that game and put themselves in a position to be in this series. But a lot of that has to do with Milwaukee plays damn good defense. We know how good Giannis is on the defensive end. We know how good Drew Holiday is on the defensive end. So when your top two players are that invested defensively, then the other guys kind of buy into it. I think Middleton's a decent defender. He's long. And
I think they're the deepest defensive team in basketball.
They may be. Yeah, because
the amount of guys who can play defense.
Yeah, because Lopez
PJ Tucker is an excellent defender still.
Excellent defender.
Can't score, but he's an excellent defender.
He's one of the weird players that I actually like. Like PJ Tucker's a perfect Jet Stryer guy, right? You know, he's 6'5", 250, wears his socks all the way up to his knees. He almost looks like a guy that just showed up at the Y to just run a couple of scrimmages against some friends. Maybe he's like the football player who stays in shape in the offseason.
But do you see
after
him
lifting weights, he goes plays, but he plays excellent defense for a guy he's thick, right? He's 6'5",
No, I was saying he's like the immovable object, Sap. I was going to say, like when guys try to back him down, it's like running into a brick wall. No, he doesn't give an inch.
No, he looks like an NFL tight end, right? So maybe in the next round he's going to have to check Kevin Durant. Good luck with that. You can't really cover that guy, but it's going to look like Laurel and Hardy if they're going up against each other because Durant's 7 feet, probably 220. I mean, that fall the other night Durant had, he looked like Gumby. Like his arm went below his ass, but he has no ass, so nothing really happened. And he just jumped up because he's like, a stretch it man or whatever the case may be. But yeah, PJ Tucker's another good defender. I always thought the Celtics should have tried to get a player like PJ Tucker. I know you would have embraced it.
Yeah.
But he's a versatile defender. And I think he's another guy who's been in the league a long time. They're all buying in. And look, Giannis is a very easy guy to root for. I mean, he really is. I mean, he embraces that community. He's not looking to go elsewhere unless they just don't break through. And at some point he says, well, I got to try to win a championship.
He's got a good personality.
He's got a great personality. I mean, and the foreign players tend to be very loyal to their franchises. Dirk Nowitzki. I think you're going to maybe see that with Luka Doncic in Dallas, although I think Luka is a little bit different. Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili. Yeah, I mean, those guys. I mean, Tim Duncan was born in the Virgin Islands, but he was actually felt like he was from another planet, let alone the United States. So he was also a very loyal guy. Maybe he could have went elsewhere. He was close to signing with Orlando, 5-6 years into the league, and then he bowed out at the last second. But yeah, the foreign players like Giannis tend to be very loyal to their original franchises. And I think he wants to win a championship in Milwaukee. If he's able to win a championship there and being a 2-time MVP, his legacy starts to jump, into pretty high stratosphere. Because, I mean, the numbers he puts up are phenomenal. I compared him to Karl Malone the other day, which, got a lot of heat on Twitter because people started bringing up that Karl Malone had sex with a 14-year-old. I wasn't making that comparison. I'm saying as a player, they're somewhat similar.
People go to that?
They just go to things that you don't even expect. I'm like, no, I put it out there that Giannis reminds me a lot of Karl Malone. That's a compliment and an insult. A compliment in that, they both played their asses off, put up great numbers. Both have won 2 MVPs, but late in games, there's sometimes a liability because they're not really good at the free throw line, and they just don't seem to make that breakthrough play to put the team over the top. Maybe Giannis changes that conversation this year. That was an impressive game. It really was. And again, once you get out to that early lead, I think Miami, because it is a series, looked at it and says, why are we going to bother? Like, are we going to cut this to 10 maybe by the end of the fourth quarter? What good does that do us? Let's just get some rest for our guys and look forward to game 3 back in Miami.
Yeah, and obviously that's a must-win for Miami. You can't go
Yeah.
down 3-0. No one's come back from it in the NBA ever before. One last note about Miami, Sap, is that I think they fell a little bit into this Celtics Danny Ainge trap in that
Mhm.
they started to overrate their players a little bit.
Yep.
They overrated Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson to the point where they had an opportunity to trade for James Harden. They said no. They had the opportunity to trade for Kyle Lowry. They said no. You know, that's exactly what the Celtics have done. And so, as much credit as we give Pat Riley for being a great GM and everything like that, he did make a very costly error there now, because had they had let's just say Kyle Lowry in this series instead of
Mm.
Tyler Hero, they'd be in a lot better shape. And had they have obviously James Harden, it'd be a completely different story. They'd be seriously looked at as a title contender. And
Mhm.
we talked about this, I think, a month or so ago, Sap. Hero got incredibly overrated in the bubble. He's a
Yep.
fine player, but people were talking about him like he was going to be a perennial all-star. There's a reason he wasn't, he was picked where he was picked. He has flaws to his game. He's not as consistent of a shooter as you would want, and he's not consistent getting the basket, and he's not a good defender. So,
Right.
once teams saw him and figured him out, he's struggled this year, and he's been a no-show in these two playoff games.
Yeah, he can be instant offense off the bench, which is nice to have. No one's saying you don't want that, but he's not going to be a all-around player who's going to get you 22, 24 points a night, play really good defense. I don't think he'll ever be a superstar in this league. He can be kind of like a cult hero. He's got a cool name, Tyler Hero, and he's a good-looking dude from Wisconsin, played 1 year at Kentucky, so he'll have somewhat of a cult following. And look, white guys that can play get a following because America's starving for a white American player to be really good. Like, there aren't many. Most of all the great white players come from other countries. So the United States, American basketball fans are like, oh, maybe this guy's going to be really good. I remember Rex Chapman, who I loved Rex Chapman at Kentucky, and he never really became a star in the NBA, but he was fun to watch because the basketball fans were like, oh, maybe we've got the next Jerry West. Well, the next Jerry West happens to be Steph Curry, except West was a better defender. But you get my point. So yeah, I think maybe Miami's fallen in love with some of these players. And look, if they want to jump into the upper echelon of the East, they're going to have to make some move in the offseason, because as much as we both like and respect Jimmy Butler, he should be your second best player if you're really a title contender, right?
Right.
And
But now
Bam
the
should
problem
be a
is,
third player.
I agree, but the problem is now that Hero's value is not nearly what
Right.
it was coming out of the bubble. I mean, if had James Harden been available now, they would have laughed at that offer. Considering,
Sure.
I mean, they took nothing for him, so maybe they wouldn't have laughed at that offer. But it's just they're not going to be able to get as much for Hero as they could have before. They held him for too long because they fell in love with him. And Sap, should they have traded him for Kyle Lowry at the trade deadline?
That's a tough one because Kyle Lowry's 36 and he can be a free agent. And if you're the Miami Heat and you looked at the landscape, no matter who you added to that roster for this year only, were you going to beat Brooklyn and Philadelphia and even Milwaukee?
I think they can, though. That's the thing. I think they came into this series thinking they could get to the finals.
I think because of the success they had last year against Milwaukee. Now, this is a different year. Milwaukee is much more focused and better prepared and also better orchestrated than they were a year ago. Milwaukee did not embrace the bubble. They just didn't. Other teams did. So Miami did. Miami bounced them. Miami at its best is the fourth best team in the Eastern Conference. I mean, they probably have a better roster than the Knicks in Atlanta, barely. But in the Eastern Conference, there's a pecking order of, Brooklyn has the three otherworldly stars. Philadelphia has a solid roster, as does Milwaukee. Those are the three best teams in the Eastern Conference. So they probably decided at that point that, okay, maybe we can make a run here, but do we want to trade a 22-year-old who still has some upside for a 36-year-old player who is going to be a free agent at the end of the year? That's a big question that you have to ask yourself. And that 14-year age difference is pretty sizable. And maybe Miami at that point felt the ceiling was getting to the conference finals. And even though Kyle Lowry's a winner and a tough-minded guy, that he wouldn't put them over the top. I kind of watch now the Lakers play, wishing that they had gone all in on Kyle Lowry more so than Andre Drummond. I mean, they have size, and LeBron's so damn versatile. I think Kyle Lowry would have been a really nice fit with them. But Lowry ended up staying in Toronto, and we'll see what happens in his future.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the bigger mistake was not trading for Harden, because then
Right.
you're adding him and you're preventing him from going to the Nets, so it's sort of a
Right.
twofold thing. But revisionist history. We'll move on to the other game last night, Sap, and one that you again pretty expertly predicted. The Nuggets took care of Portland 128 to 109. Portland made a little late run at it, but it was in Denver's control for most of the game. The presumptive MVP, Nikola Jokic, was fantastic. He did get help last night. Dame Lillard, like you mentioned at the top, also fantastic. Didn't get as much help, and that's more or less what the game came down to.
Yeah, I mean, the matchup of Jokic against Nurkic was one-sided. And if Portland's going to win this series, which I predicted they would, it has to be a little bit tighter than that, right? I mean, Nurkic is a pretty talented guy, and he's enormous. So you would think he could bang with Jokic. But again, the European players tend to not be very physical. The way to get Jokic out of his comfort zone, out of his game, is to be physical with him. We saw that's what Dwight Howard did last year in the Western Conference. We even saw the Celtics do it in a regular season game a few months ago when they came from a major deficit to actually blow Denver out. You can get in his head and get him out of his comfort zone, but you got to be physical with him. And if Portland's not physical with him, he's going to have these types of games. He's that good. It's going to come down to Dame Lillard and Jokic. If they cross each other off, it's going to come down to those secondary players. So CJ McCollum has to step up. He's, in theory, Portland's second best player. They don't have a lot of talent on the wings. I know a few pundits were talking about maybe when the season's over. And again, we're in the postseason, so to look forward to the offseason, you're already rebuilding the Miami Heat. And I'm looking at how Portland can get better. Do you move on from CJ McCollum and try to get a wing? And look, if the Clippers get bounced in the first round, I'm sure Steve Ballmer will gladly trade Paul George. Maybe you've got some sort of deal there, Paul George to Portland for CJ McCollum and some other assets, and both teams get something they need. Only in the NBA would you start the postseason one game or two games in, and you're already looking to the offseason, because we all kind of agree only 5 teams can win this title.
Yeah,
right.
They're not in the mix.
I mean, the Clippers are. The Clippers are one
one
of the 5
but
teams.
Portland and Miami aren't.
No. And look, the Clippers, if they don't win tonight against Dallas, they'll be down 0-2 going back to Dallas, and you can make a case Dallas is a better team. At this point, Luka Doncic is playing better than Kawhi Leonard or Paul George. They can't match up with him, especially when they switch Pat Beverly on him. That's a total mismatch. So, yeah, I mean, this is what we do in the NBA, though, right? I mean, if you're in the finals last year with the Lakers and the Heat, and you're like, okay, what are the Lakers going to do in the offseason? Is Dwight Howard coming back? Is Rondo coming back? What exactly are the Heat going to do to improve? That's what makes the NBA so fascinating. You don't really do this in other sports where you plan a year ahead while you're in the playoffs.
Right. And, Portland did get very little help from their wings last night. Robert Covington, only 3 points. He only shot the ball 3 times in 37 minutes, which is hard to do. And Carmelo was not good last night. 21 minutes, 5 points off the bench for Carmelo. 1 of 5 shooting, as I hiccup. The Nuggets just, they were more in their game. Portland wasn't able to take Jokic out like they did in the first game as much. I mean, still, it's, 38 points is phenomenal for Jokic, but 5 assists and 8 rebounds is still below his average. So on the lower side there. But he did get 2 guys off his bench, Millsap and Morris, scored in double figures. Aaron Gordon at 13, Michael Porter Jr. at 18, Campazzo at 12, Austin Rivers at 9. Can you believe Austin Rivers started that game?
Still playing.
Yeah, still playing, still kicking around. He was cut from the Knicks, and he's starting on the Nuggets in the playoffs.
He may play for every team in the league when he's all done with. Yeah, he may end up with every team at some point, just a kind of a tour of the 30 NBA teams. Yeah, if there's one series in the West that looks like it's going minimum 6, probably 7, it's Portland-Denver. If there's one series in the East that you feel pretty confident is going to go 6 or 7 games, it's Atlanta-New York. Those 4 teams are pretty well matched up and not quite good enough to run away from the opposition, but good enough to stay competitive.
Well, we both had this going 7, Sap, and you had the Blazers and I had the Nuggets. And so, it did look like a pick'em series. And so far it's playing out that way. And the 2 biggest stars in the series, Lillard and Jokic, have both been phenomenal in both games. And each guy has taken one. So, We'll see how that goes, and I think you're right that it seems like it has 7 written all over it. I would honestly be surprised if it doesn't. It just seems like they're just going to keep swapping games.
Yeah, and they can win on the other team's home court. When you have great players like Dame Lillard and the Joker, those players can go into hostile enemy territory and still put up big games. Like Dame Lillard can score on the road as easily as he can at home, and the same thing with Nikola Jokic. Those are elite players. I think that series is going 7. We both agree on that. I just think Portland in the end, Dame Lillard is such a clutch player that I'd put my money on him, but I wouldn't be shocked, obviously, if Denver advances, and then they would play the winner of Phoenix Lakers. You're more confident in the Lakers than I am, but I think we both think the Lakers will advance, even though they're down 1-0 right now in their series.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the previewing tonight's games in a second. I just wanted to say this real quick because I know you're a big Colin Cowherd guy, Sap. He does that segment where he says Colin was right. He likes to do that segment where he gives himself a pat on the back. He does do that too.
No, he does, because he alternates between right and wrong. So he's pretty transparent, my man.
Did you see what his Colin was right was the other day about Dame Lillard?
What did he say? That he's the most clutch player in the NBA?
Good. That Dame Lillard is good. He's like, nobody knows this but me because he plays in Portland. It's like, how are you going to give yourself credit for saying Dame Lillard is really good at basketball? Everybody knows Dame Lillard's really good at basketball. He was patting himself on the back. I told you about this guy. Like, it seemed like he was really stretching to find a Colin was right segment is my point.
Yeah, that is a tough one, because it'd be like saying, I let you know that the sky is blue. Dame Lillard is probably going to be second team All NBA in the backcourt. I think Steph and Luka will be first team All NBA, and Dame's on the second team with, I don't know, pick another guard, whether it's Devin Booker or Kyrie Irving or whoever. He's that good. I mean, Dame Lillard to me is a lot like Steph Curry, just not quite as good, but there are a lot of similarities there. Neither's great on the defensive end. They're probably the best deep shooters in the league, along with Kevin Durant, and whenever Klay Thompson comes back, those would be like the 4 guys that I would trust taking 35-footers because they'll make them. Lillard's an excellent assistman. Trae Young's up there too. He's getting there. It's like the other day we talked about who are the 4 best drivers of the basketball to the rim. It's LeBron, Giannis, Ben Simmons, and Zion. None of those guys are really great at the free throw line. If they were, they'd drive the ball even more. But when we're talking about Dame, he's right up there with Curry, Durant, Trae Young eventually, and obviously Klay Thompson when he's healthy. He's that good. But yeah, Colin, it was good that he said that Dame Lillard's good. So he was right. About that.
He nailed it.
Well, it was almost like, you're probably too young to remember this. Larry King used to have a column in the USA Today. If people read newspapers back then, the USA Today, every Monday, he'd have a column with like the most obvious stuff. Like nothing better than strawberry ice cream on a hot summer day. I'm like, wow, I never thought of that.
So it's basically Magic Johnson's Twitter account.
Very much so, yeah. What a great player LeBron James is. Like, we had never thought of that.
What did Magic say? The Lakers advanced to the next round after beating the Warriors. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know.
What is he, the AP?
We're getting our news from Magic. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, I don't know.
No opinions ever.
He didn't as an analyst or whatever he was. He was doing. He was doing the pre and post game show. He was horrible. He just wouldn't say anything. He would, great players generally don't make great commentators. They just don't, because they see the game completely differently. You don't remember Joe Montana did color in the NFL for a couple of years. He was horrible. He was just wouldn't say anything. I don't think Tom Brady would be that great at it. Maybe he would. He'd probably work his ass off and become like a great broadcaster. I know the networks have always tried to get Peyton Manning to do it. I think he'd be good because he's got a real personality. And Magic has a personality. It's just he's almost afraid to say anything bad about anybody. And that's a player like Kendrick Perkins, who was, a lunch pail guy, a part of a championship team, but a role player. He's great at it because, let's face facts, especially late in his career, he sat on the bench a lot and watched these guys. So he learned from that, and he played with all these different players. And he knows what he's doing, and he's comfortable with that. That's why Perk is so good. Now, Barkley is one of those guys who was a great player, and he's great at what he does, but he's not necessarily an analyst. Like, I don't even know if Charles watches the game.
No, he gets things wrong all the time. I mean,
all the time, but he's kind of like your lovable uncle that you just kind of laugh at, but that's what he's
riffs.
there for.
He's good at it. He riffs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a radio show. The TNT pre and post game show, that's a radio show. You know, Eddie Johnson's like the facilitator. Kenny Smith's more of the
he's
stats,
the analyst,
analytics, and then Shaq and Barkley are there for comic relief, and they have a great vibe between them.
They riff.
Yeah, so that's why that
do.
works. That's all they do. Like, Barkley's not there with analytics, so he's not going
Kenny's
through his
the straight
notes.
man, and so
Kenny's a straight man. I mean, didn't Barkley fall asleep during the first half of a game on Sunday?
He doesn't know what he's talking about, but he doesn't care. It doesn't matter.
He's good at it.
He's great at it. He's phenomenal. You're right. It's a radio show.
We know radio hosts that didn't watch the games that they bullshit their way through it, and it worked.
John Dennis.
Yes, I'm glad you said it. I didn't want to bring him into the equation because I actually have a good relationship with John Dennis. I did years ago when I was breaking into the business, always very nice to me. And John Dennis now is retired and golfing and having a good old time. But yeah, John Dennis would miss the Red Sox game, but he was so good at what he did that he made you feel like he watched every pitch of every inning.
My first job at EEI was coming in the morning. All right, tell me what happened in the game last night. Print out the box score. Tell me what happened in the game. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that now.
John.
You got a play-by-play sheet in every sport, even baseball. And just subscribe to Boston Sports Journal. Just read that game notes.
Baseball,
and you got that.
Can't blame him. I'm not watching every baseball game too. It's monotonous.
No.
Monotonous. Why? If you could have an intern or an employee just tell you what happened, give me the highlights. Perfect. I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Good
macro
for you,
more
Dino.
than micro. If you're good at macro rather than micro, then you can go places because you don't want to delve into like every nook and cranny of every game.
Especially with baseball. Jesus Christ. So the last thing before we get into these previews tonight, Sap, I just want to leave you with this Magic Johnson tweet from May 23rd. Phoenix guard Devin Booker looked awesome in his first playoff game, scoring 34 points in the Suns' 99-90 win. He had help from DeAndre Ayton, who outplayed Lakers big man Anthony Davis, scoring 21 points and 16 rebounds. Was he writing up the game for USA Today? Like, why is that a tweet?
Maybe Magic has a second career as a reporter. He's covering the game for someone.
No
analysis.
Listen, I follow him on Twitter because it's hilarious, and he's always been like this with his Twitter. But it's just like, it's wild. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish? I saw what happened, Magic. You don't have to give me the final score of the game.
Yeah, chances are if you're following Magic on Twitter, you're watching the games. Especially if you're following Magic, you're probably a Laker fan. So you're watching the Lakers play the Suns in the playoffs, so we kind of get it. But Magic's always been a guy that...
oh, geez, you know what? What was the final score of that game? I better check Magic Johnson's Twitter for the final score.
I go right to ESPN. That's the first place I go, or NBA.com. But Magic's always loved to be loved. That's his personality, and that worked for him. It worked for him on the court, and it's worked for him in business. He's that lovable guy. So that's the brand he's always sold. Whereas Kevin Durant, maybe not so much on Twitter. In addition to all his burner accounts, I'm surprised Kevin Durant.
Grilled chicken over salad. That's what you like to say, right? That's Magic's Twitter.
Yes, Magic's definitely grilled chicken over salad, whereas someone like Kevin Durant is jambalaya. You don't know what it's going to taste like on a daily basis.
My new favorite ex-NBA player, Kwame Brown, is loving Kwame Brown. He somehow is live on YouTube 24 hours a day. I'll put on YouTube. Kwame Brown's live ripping on somebody else. I think he might be the new Perk. Him and Perk should do a show together.
Yeah, but Perk at least was a better player, I think. I mean, and Kwame Brown had a higher ceiling. He was the first pick in the draft. Again, Michael Jordan was the guy who selected him for Washington, so says how poor Michael Jordan is at selecting
just eviscerating
talent.
People now, Kwame Brown.
Yeah, and he kind of came out of nowhere because we haven't heard from him for years, and all of a sudden he's decided that he's going to have this brand out there. And look, good for him. We like hearing that stuff. That's what makes the NBA fun. You don't see this in other sports. You do get some NFL guys, like Brett Favre trolls somewhat on Twitter. He's kind of like a country and western star out there, like pontificating about the league, especially the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers. But yeah, you don't see that as much in the NFL. And the NBA, the eighth guy on a team or the ninth guy on a team has a brand and has 2 million Twitter followers. Yeah. Perk was a role player. Yeah, he was a starting center, but he was a role player.
Look, Kenny Smith, I mean, was a very good player, but he was
Very good
not a
player.
star player. And look, he's had this
No.
job forever now. So
Yeah, he's good. He's very good at what he does. And even Reggie Miller, I thought, did a good job on the game last night.
I like
I'm
Reggie.
thinking,
I think he
I
does a
like
good job.
Reggie. He does a good job. And I'm starting to think that Kevin Harlan is right there with Mike Breen as the best play-by-play guy in the business. Now, I'm taking Marv Albert out of the equation because Marv's 80. This is going to be his last year doing the national TV games.
He's still
He's
so
been
good
the
at
best
it.
for years. He's still phenomenal. The voice, the resonance. He's making a lot of mistakes. He's 80 years old.
And they're
I
not
can
there.
understand that. That's the other part, that you have to give a little slack to these older guys because they're like in such a foreign territory.
Yeah,
They're not at the
Gorman
games
this season too.
a lot. And look, I'll be watching the games. And again, I don't have the best vision, although good news today. I went to see my ophthalmologist, and we're going to have the cataracts out sometime in July. So I'll be seeing a lot
Back
better.
To the movies.
I hope so. So I'm looking forward to that. But these guys are older than I am. So just think about, maybe the reflexes aren't as good, or they're not seeing they're in their studio or in their home with as big a TV as they can find. And sometimes you can't, see who's who. And I know when we were covering the Celtics, we'd be up on the 9th floor. I'd stay there for about half a game, and then I'd just go in the press room. This is more recently. Back in the 80s, we got to sit courtside. It was awesome. But now those seats are worth a lot of money. So they'd stick us up on the 9th floor, and you couldn't see up there. They're good for hockey, not basketball. And I know that Grandy was calling play-by-play up on the 9th floor. God bless him. I don't know how he did it, but he's outstanding at it.
Yeah, and he's used to it. But like Marv's been calling games for 50 years from the same spot, and then suddenly they're like, "Oh, you can't. You're going to have to watch from your living room now and call the game." It's a big adjustment.
It is. Like, who's setting the computer up? Like, I have enough trouble setting the phone and my headset up for this. I mean, Marv Albert's
grandkids probably.
Or Kenny, his son, who's a good play-by-play guy as well. But I like Kevin Harlan a lot. He's really grown on me. He's just got that energy that you like. And maybe because his dad was president of the Green Bay Packers years ago.
Yeah, maybe that might be why. So let's fly through these games tonight, Sap, for our predictions. We'll start with the Celtics and Nets. They tip off at 7:30 tonight. I've been all over sweep. You think 5 games? Is this the game the Celtics take or no?
No, I think they keep it close, though. Again, the zigzag theory would lead you to believe that the Celtics will cover the 10-point spread. So Brooklyn's going to win. Celtics will play better than they did the other night offensively. But in the end, Brooklyn will make the big plays down the stretch, whether it's Durant, Kyrie, or Harden, or Joe Harris sometimes has wide open looks. But I think the Celtics can cover the 10-point spread. It's going to be close to that line, but it'll be worth watching, but you never really feel that they have a chance to win.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I obviously think they're going to lose every game. That's what a sweep is. So I don't think they're going to win tonight. I think Tatum will play better. And I would like to see what I mentioned in the last game, in the last show, Sap, is that the Celtics try to be more physical and muck it up and maybe play 2 bigs at once. Try stuff. Try anything.
Yeah.
Why not? You have literally nothing to lose. Everybody's expecting you to get swept or losing 5 games. You don't have Jaylen Brown there. The season sucked. People are ready for it to be over anyways. So just, try stuff. See if it works. But I don't think they'll win tonight. And you think they'll cover? I don't, because they haven't had a good game against Brooklyn. They were blown out 3 times in the regular season, and Brooklyn probably, I would assume, played their worst offensive game of the series in game 1. So I have a hard time thinking the Celtics will cover that, even though it is a big spread. So we both have the Nets in that game. Unfortunately, the Lakers and Suns and Mavericks and Clippers are overlapping, so I'm going to have to do some channel back and forth on those games. The Lakers tip off at 10 Eastern. I know you won't. And 10:30 Eastern are the Mavericks and Clippers. Interestingly enough, Sap, the losers of game 1 are both favored in these games. The Lakers are favored by 2 points over the Suns. The Clippers are favored by 7. I'm looking at the line right now. I think that's the most current line over the Mavericks. Sap, I assume you think the Lakers are going to win this one.
Yeah, I like both LA teams tonight. Again, based on the zigzag theory, the Lakers didn't cover game 1. They'll cover game 2. They're a 2-point favorite. Anthony Davis will play better tonight. He has to outplay DeAndre Ayton. If he doesn't, the Lakers are in trouble. LeBron will force the action a little bit more than he did the other night. Early in that game, he came out and scored 8 points in the first 4 minutes. He only scored 10 the rest of the way. I think he'll start to attack the basket more than he did in game one. And all you need for the Lakers is KCP to hit some threes or Dennis Schroeder to hit some threes, someone to help out scoring. But I think that Anthony Davis has a big bounce back game in game two. And how many times have we said LeBron James after game one kind of resets what his team is going to do? 12 times in his career, he's won a series after losing game one in a series. And I think they're better than Phoenix. And again, you got to check the health of Chris Paul. He'll be better than he was in game one after sustaining that shoulder injury. They're calling it a stinger, which sometimes it takes a couple of days to get out of your system. But he's going to be limited as well. And they've got to make some defensive adjustments on Devin Booker. They're going to have to double team him and let someone else try to beat him. But I think the Lakers will be fine tonight.
I think this game will be very telling on if LeBron is actually hurt or not. If he plays well, I think it's pretty clear that he's been faking it all along, just as I've assumed. If he doesn't, then maybe there's something to it. But I'll make something up. I'll address that if that happens. I think they're gonna crush Phoenix tonight. I think they're gonna win by 15 plus.
Wow. Okay. I think it'll be a little closer. The Lakers never really play a complete 48-minute game. Look, who does in the NBA other than Milwaukee last night, where it was from like start to finish. They were clicking on all cylinders. They'll get a lead. They'll kind of fall asleep for a little bit. Then they'll, put it back up to 12 points in the third quarter. And in the end, they'll win by 6 or 8 like they generally do. They don't shoot free throws that well. So, a 14-point lead with 4 minutes left can all of a sudden dwindle down to 8, which can sometimes get scary. But I think they'll win tonight. You seem to be more confident than I am. But again, I think we'll have to see what LeBron does tonight. I want to see him go ultra aggressive. And we want to also see how many minutes Andre Drummond plays. Drummond, when he's out there, puts up good numbers, but he seems to be in the way of Anthony Davis and LeBron James. LeBron likes a clear lane to the basket. Drummond hasn't played much with LeBron. He's played a little more with Anthony Davis. So the chemistry is not great with Drummond and those two players. We'll see how many minutes he plays. Maybe they'll go with a smaller lineup.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't play Dwight Howard in every series last year, if I'm recalling correctly. So they should treat Drummond the same sort of way.
Yeah.
I think the inclination is, well, they have a true big center on Phoenix in DeAndre Ayton. Let's get our big center out there. But maybe they need to just try to go with speed and skill as opposed to just sheer size. And but I think I've said 5 Lakers in 5, so I'm picking the Lakers tonight.
Yeah, I say Lakers in 6. I think I predicted a tougher series than you thought, but at least last year with Dwight Howard, he'd go in there when he faced Nikola Jokic and punch him in the nuts. Like he would get under people's skin, whereas Andre Drummond isn't that type of guy where, I think they missed that edge that Dwight Howard brought them last year. And again, maybe you get DeAndre Ayton off his game. If you're physical with him, that's not generally Andre Drummond's style, or certainly it's not Anthony Davis's style. The most likely Laker to maybe get in the face of DeAndre Ayton is probably Schroeder, and he's 6'1". I mean, he's not going to scare anybody. He's a little bit of a psycho out there, kind of like a German version of Rajon Rondo, right?
Yes.
We say there's some comparisons there, but yeah, you got to get those guys off their game. Phoenix looked way too comfortable in game one, and then they out-rebounded the Lakers 47-33. That can't happen.
Yeah, it shouldn't, considering how big the Lakers are. There's no reason that should happen.
Lakers
should
never lose the rebounding battle. They should never. I mean, because in oftentimes they have LeBron at point guard. Can you think of a better rebounding point guard? And you can bring up Russell Westbrook. Yes, I get that. But LeBron is more of a traffic rebounder than, say, Russell Westbrook, because he's 6'9", 260. I mean, he can move people out of the way. Westbrook just is so relentless and just kind of flies through people. But yeah, they should never lose the rebounding battle, ever.
Yeah, so we'll see what happened with the Lakers tonight. The last game, like I said, it does overlap a little bit with the Lakers. Tips off 30 minutes afterwards. The Mavericks in LA to take on the Clippers. Again, the Clippers are 7-point favorites in this game, which is a large number considering they did not play well at all in the first game.
I think the Clippers are going to blow them out tonight. And again, I look at that line and say, why is it 7? It should be 3.5, maybe 4. When the line's that big, it leads me to believe that the Clippers are going to blow out the Mavericks, because the average bettor in Vegas will look at that and say, give me Dallas +7. They just won game 1. And then when the game's over, they're ripping up their ticket because the Clippers win by 15 or 18. I think the Clippers will come up big tonight. If they don't, they're in trouble. They've got to win this game. They can't go to Dallas down 0-2 and all of that doubt that is still kind of in the Clippers organization. You got Steve Ballmer's not a patient man as owner. Everybody will be, on very shaky ground at that point. And, in addition to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, some other players are going to have to step up. Marcus Morris was horrible in game one. He's a key component there. He's going to have to play better. I think the Clippers will get it done tonight. And again, that line leads me to believe it's going to be a blowout. So in terms of against the spread, I like the Celtics +10, the Lakers -2, and the Clippers -7.
Yeah, the Clippers, when we've been doing this with every game, Sap, with every day of the playoffs, is who needs the game the most, and it's no question of these games. It's the Clippers. Listen, nobody expects the Celtics to win the series, so any game that they win is prolonging the inevitable. The Lakers can come back from down 0-2 heading to LA. The Clippers cannot, because they would have lost home court advantage, lost both the games, going to Dallas, already in their heads what happened in the bubble last year. They can't lose this game. Period. They need it. If they're done, if they lose this game, I have no problem saying write them off. They're done.
Yeah, because that would be a 5-game losing streak in the postseason. They lost the last 3 last year after having a 3-1 lead over Denver in the second round. And if they're down 0-2 in this series, it would be 5 losses in a row. And you got Luka Doncic playing with a ton of confidence. He doesn't need much more confidence to play the way he does. He's a pretty cocky young player. That's why I love him. He's got a little bit of Larry Bird in him. He's not quite there yet. I know everyone calls him Baby Bird. He's not the shooter Larry Bird was, and I don't think he'll ever be quite that good a shooter. Larry Bird was one of the greatest shooters we've ever seen, but he's got some elements of Bird's game, including that nastiness, likes to trash talk and not afraid to take big shots. He'll be playing with a ton of confidence if Dallas is able to win tonight.
Yeah, so we'll see, and we're going to be back tomorrow talking about more of those games. Also, we're going to talk later in the week about this proposal for the play-in tournament.
Right.
I just want to make sure we give it enough time as opposed to sort of rushing it at the end, Sap. But these games will be great tonight. I'm assuming, other than the Celtics one, which that's like watching a horror show. What the Killers
horror show or a horror show? I'm not sure. Is
horror
okay.
show. That's my New
Not
England accent, I guess.
No, I guess that's not a WHORE.
No,
okay,
no, that's not.
That would be some of the players on the Knicks. The Nets are made up with a lot of those guys. Yeah, I mean,
James Harden is on the Nets, so
yeah. Oh, yeah, he would like that. He would actually take that as a compliment.
But yeah, I mean, it's like the killer's going to get you eventually.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of when the Celtics are going to finally just throw up their hands and say, "Just murder me already." You know what? Get it over with.
Like
make it quick.
Friday the 13th right. part, whatever. They had a chance in game one. Now, again, you have to play perfect to beat the Nets. And they were anything but that. Tatum, Walker, Evan Fournier were 14 of 46 from the floor. That's 30%. You're not beating mediocre teams with that output, let alone the Nets. The scary thing about the Nets, Jet, I don't think Durant, Harden, or Kyrie played really that great for them. I mean, these are all-time great players. They still combined for 82 points. Like, if they're all on, they could combine for 100 points. Like me, you, and
they'll do it. No
a few
problem.
Other people could do that.
There's going to be some games. End up doing
There's going to be some games where you go, Durant can get like 38 in his sleep. Kyrie will go get 32. Harden will get 30 and double-digit rebounds and assists. And you're going to go, how the hell are we beating these guys? They just went for 100 combined. Efficiently. That's the scary part. No, it's scary.
All along.
It is. If they're as committed as they were the other night on the defensive end, yikes. But to get to the finals, they're still going to have to beat a really good Milwaukee team and a really good Philadelphia team. It's not going to be a cakewalk for them. Whereas when Golden State was going to 5 straight finals, other than the second year when Oklahoma City had a 3-1 lead, did you really ever feel, I mean, Houston did bring them to game 7, I guess, with Harden and Chris Paul. But once Chris Paul was out for game 6 and 7, you knew Golden State was going to win.
I never thought they were threatened. Never thought that they were threatened.
I did against Houston, especially when Houston won game 5, but then Chris Paul hurt his hamstring and couldn't play in games 6 or 7. But pretty much throughout that run, you felt Golden State was nearly unbeatable. You feel that way about Brooklyn, but I think that Milwaukee and Philadelphia will have more than a puncher's chance against them because they're really committed on the defensive end. And they also have really good matchups against Brooklyn because of Giannis and Embiid. Those guys are tough matchups for Brooklyn to combat. But again, when you're on your defensive side of the ball, you're looking at Durant, Kyrie, and Harden. It's like, holy shit, what do we do?
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to be back talking about all these games, giving more previews and predictions, and we'll look at all the betting lines too when we do that, just because that's some extra stuff to talk about. Again, our predictions for tonight are the Sappy, you have the Celtics covering. I have them
Covering.
not covering and losing to the Nets. You have the Lakers covering over the Suns, and I have the Lakers blowing the hell out of the Suns, and you have the Clippers blowing out the Mavericks and covering because of that too. So we'll see what happens. We'll talk about it. We'll be here throughout the playoffs, as you would expect. We are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out our podcast wherever podcasts are found, and check out our Twitters also at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer, and the YouTube version is youtube.com/Jet Stryer. Thanks for listening, everybody, or watching if you did that, and we'll see you later.